Hey everybody, welcome back to Author Eke. Today we're across the pond talking to Patrick Larsimont, and he is 1 mile from the beach in the UK.
That's right.
So don't nobody get upset with him. He worked hard his whole life and he deserves it.
Well,
So
also, the one thing to remember, though, it's in the UK, so it's not
okay,
exactly a Sunshine State or anything.
yeah, but you can see it.
Yeah, for sure, for
Excellent.
sure.
So he has written some very interesting books on a young Scottish kid who wants to serve his country during World War II. In the darkest times of World War II, the Battle of Britain.
That's
And for
right.
you guys that don't know, that was a monumental task that the RAF did in that period. And it was because, one, just the sheer bravery of the men and women, and also the invention of radar.
Mhm.
so, so excellent. But Patrick, please tell us about yourself, and then we're going to talk about these awesome books because
Cool.
I am a big World War II and
Great,
airplane fan.
great. Well, as I say, my name is Patrick Larsimont. I grew up in Scotland. Went to boarding school at the same school as my hero. So it starts off. His name is Jock McNabb, which is actually the surname of the founder of my school. It was called Dollar Academy. It
Mhm.
is called Dollar Academy. And so basically, this kid gets into trouble because he goes out to have a drink with his friends and gets thrown out of school. Doesn't know what he's going to do. It's 1939, July 1939, and actually he sees a Hurricane fighter flying over, and he sees the initials written on the side of the plane, and it says JXM, Jocks McNabb. And he goes, "Okay, I'm going to become a fighter pilot,"
Excellent.
and that's it. And so then the story is basically a young kid. I mean, he's 17 years old, and he basically tries to join. And so the first couple of chapters, 4 chapters, is him basically trying to make it.
Hmm.
Things happen to him. One of his best friends gets killed. I mean, so it's actually quite realistic. But again, the thing to remember is this is a really young kid. And so by the time he's in the Battle of France, also known as Blitzkrieg, so the title of my book is The Lightning and the Few. And the lightning refers to the Lightning War, which is Blitzkrieg, which is where the
Hmm.
Germans charge across Poland, France, Belgium, Holland. And so basically, the British try to help the French by sending their fighter aircraft and their troops actually over, and basically everyone gets their asses kicked.
Hmm.
And then there's Dunkirk, where they try to come back. So that's the first half of my first book, The Lightning, and then the Few is what is the name that Churchill called the fighter pilots, the young fighter pilots that defended the nation. I'm paraphrasing here, but the speech is never in the field of human conflict has so much been owed by so many to so few.
Hmm.
And so that became probably his most famous speech ever. And so I've stolen that and stuck it in there. And so that's the story. So the first book, as I say, is called The Lightning and the Few,
Hmm.
and it takes us up until the end of the Battle of Britain, and then the start of what is known in the UK as the Blitz, which is basically when the Germans stopped attacking the airfields and started attacking the folks in the cities. And that then is my book two. In fact, I can show you. This is book one,
Yes. Yes. Awesome.
and
Great.
and this is book two.
Perfect.
So book two is the Raiders and the Cross. So the Raiders is the Raiders coming over in air raids,
Hmm.
and then there's another story which not everyone knows about the Siege of Malta, which is kind of like the key to the Mediterranean, which was like at one time it was known as the most bombed place on Earth,
Hmm.
and so that's a kind of another interesting story. I think from a North American perspective, I mean, this all sounds like a very British story, but in fact, there were an awful lot of troops from lots of places, part of the British Empire, a lot of Canadians, a whole bunch of Americans actually joined
Hmm.
the Royal Canadian Air Force to actually join in. And in my story, there's a whole bunch of squadrons called the Eagle Squadrons, which are involved. In fact, one little sort of statistic I've got is 60% of my readers are American.
Yep.
Um, and a remarkable number of them are in law enforcement.
Oh, excellent.
Go figure.
Excellent. They like to get away from what they do every day to
Well, I
read
guess so. I
a
guess
good
so. I mean,
story.
I've had a few guys send me pictures of their handguns, which is a bit weird. But
And we like guns. We're
yeah,
American. We like
I
guns.
guess so. Um, and then what else? I've also had a bunch of Canadian guys who get a bit upset about some of the things, because they're real sticklers for rules. I found the Canadians, and
Uh,
sometimes I think I heard one of your conversations you had about, basically guys kind of having a go at something you've written, and I call them the rivet counters, who kind of correct me on how many rivets I've got in the airplane or whatever. I think I had one guy who got very upset when he said, "This author seems to think you can recover from a stall failure in a Harvard by doing a something or other." Yes, I was in the Air Force. I have no idea what he's talking about.
It's fiction. Some people some people just don't have anything better to do than just critique somebody to death who's never done what you've done.
Well, I guess so. I mean, I'm like I said, I was an ad man for 30 years, so I've got a pretty thick skin. So,
but you do have an Air Force background. You were in the Air Force.
I do. Yes, that's right.
The intelligence side.
That's right. I served for a couple of years between university and working. My father was from Belgium, so I got that kind of the shock of my life when I was called up to do military service. But I guess if I was going to do it, I'd put my heart into it. And because I think the expression that they used was very familiar with the Anglo-Saxon world, I then became an intelligence officer. So I got up to first lieutenant equivalent in the US. And so I was based in a place called Florenne, 2nd Tactical Wing. And actually, because, for our conversation, I looked it back up again because I know that the Americans were in the southern part of our base. And I remember it now. It's the 485th Tactical Missile Wing. Over there. So that was ICBM's Griffins. So, I mean, it was pretty serious stuff. It was nuclear missiles on the base. It was towards the end of the SALT Treaty talks. And so I can remember being officer of the guard one day and officer of the watch, and this column of American vehicles pull up the front gate, and they want to come in to prepare the site for the inspection of the Soviets that were coming the next day. This was a Sunday. Right. No one knows anything. No one expects them.
No,
I'm calling the colonel up and saying, I've got about 70 Americans here who want to come in. That was a long time ago, mind you. I mean,
that was around the Pershing missile debate, putting the Pershing missile in Germany. And that's what kind of holded the escalation of the SALT Treaty.
That's right.
They didn't want nuclear missiles on the continent.
Yeah. But I mean, we also had something called the TLP, the Tactical Leadership Program for the fighter pilot squadrons across NATO. That was also based on my base, and then because it was a fighter bomber base, but also had nuclear capabilities, we regularly had exercises which involved airborne troops parachuting onto the airfield to try to seize it back from Spetsnaz. So I mean, it was great fun. I mean, you and I were both Cold War warriors.
Yes.
And that all seems a long, long time ago.
Yeah, I guarded the East-West German border and the West German Czech border. So, back in the day.
I guess so. I mean, it was very different bad guys.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it all goes like in a circle eventually.
It's all goes back to get you. So, how did you get into writing? I mean, from the Air Force and advertising, you've written a lot of copy, probably. So, how did you get?
I have, writing? But actually, I was more on the business side and the management side. And one of the things I came to realize is I paid a lot of guys a lot of money to come up with ideas and stuff. And over the years, I kind of started thinking, it's okay, but I wonder if I could do any better. And then, to be honest with you, the crux of it was, I mean, I've never really thought about writing. I sort of evaluated creatives, bought it, sold it, and all that sort of thing. But actually, lockdown came along. Yeah. And so I'm sitting there, at home wondering what to do. And I said, okay, I'll give this a go. So the first attempt I did, and you'll know this as a writer, I wrote a novel of 170,000 words long.
That's a little too long.
That's a little bit too long. You're right there.
You could have broken it up into part 1, part 2.
Well, that's right. I should have, and it could have. But actually, I mean, there's a happy ending to the story. So that was called, it is called Yesterday Soldier. So my stories tend to be kind of a military history kind of involvement. But this particular one is about previous lives. So an ordinary guy like me, I guess, has a car accident, in a coma, wakes up, terrible dreams, and it turns out he's linked back to 4 previous lives of his, where he was a soldier. And he's got to figure something out. And so it's kind of an interesting idea. Yeah. And in the past, he was a World War I soldier, World War II soldier, a Viet Cong nurse, and also an African warrior. So it's kind of an interesting, very complicated story, which I guess is why it became so long. I was lockdown 1, still don't know what I was doing. Lockdown
Right.
2 tried again. And this is
Mhm.
another story. It's called Brookwood Boys, and it's about ghosts in a place called Brookwood Cemetery, which is the largest military cemetery in the UK.
Mhm.
And it's got Americans, French, Canadian, Dutch,
Mhm.
Belgian, French. I mean, everything you could possibly think of. First World War, Second World War, and it's a really, really interesting place for me. So I used to go and visit there a lot. I mean, there's things like, even from an American perspective. So there's a whole bunch of First World War guys there. The Second World War guys were buried there, but then they were all,
Mhm.
strangely enough, dug up after the Second World War and then moved to Cambridge. Don't know
Okay.
why.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of guys from a disaster called Slapton Sands, where over 1,000 Americans got killed, and he was practicing for D-Day.
D-Day,
And so they all
yes.
got buried. They all got buried in Brookwood, and then because it's so secret, they all got dug up. And so there's a lot of intrigue and lots
Mhm.
of stuff like that going on. There's soldiers from Jet. Anyway, so this whole idea, the idea given to me is that there must be so many ghost stories here, and so I basically created a story about that.
Oh,
The
wow,
happy
that's
ending
cool.
is that subsequent to that, I then I entered a competition and won this prize to write what I am writing is these World War II aviation thrillers. So it was contract to write 5. I've written 3. I'm writing the 4th one. But in
Mhm.
the meantime, my publisher, thankfully, no spoilers, have decided to buy my first 2 books as well. So I'm on a roll. I've just got to make it happen now.
There you go. Excellent, excellent. So why aviation? Has it always interested you, or is it just because it's such a remarkable story? In England, the battle for Britain, right? That was
Yeah,
such monumental story against odds that were just. I mean, Luftwaffe had thousands of planes. They were
that's right.
based in France. They were based in Belgium, and they
That's right.
really had a very short flight to England. And then they had the night bomber capabilities
Yep,
with the Heinkels and everything. And then it's tough for a fighter to fight at night back in those periods of time.
that's right. I
So
mean,
a
they were
lot
super
was just
confident. I mean,
bombardment.
they were super confident because they'd done so well in all the other countries, and so
Hmm.
it really was the last line. I mean, I've always kind of been interested in a kind of a. I read somewhere that what is it? When men get to 40, they either develop an interest in the Second World War or they develop an interest in going to the gym. I don't know if that's true or not, but certainly I know which one I went for. Um, but so I've always been interested, and actually the aviation. I mean, I was in the Air Force, and so kind of I guess I was interested. I'm sort of interested, but
Yeah,
never. It was never a passion. I'm not one of these people who say, I was writing at the age of 7 kind of thing. No, I mean, I
yeah,
always
yeah.
liked stories. I love movies. I love war movies, and so
Mm.
it just kind of osmosis. And then I think lockdown just got me thinking I've got to do something, so I'm going to do that. Kind of was a bit of an unguided missile with the first 2 books, and then I applied for this competition and I won it, and then it's like boom, you owe us 5 books,
Yeah.
and I just got stuck in, So I guess I got a
Hmm.
pretty good work ethic, and I try to write 1,200 words a day,
That's not bad.
which
How,
is good
how how
going.
big are your books? Like how many pages
300
normally?
words, 300 pages, 30 chapters. That's kind of what I aim for. I mean,
90,
these 2
100,000
are.
words. Yeah.
Huh?
About 100,000 words or so.
Yeah, about
89,000 words.
90. Yeah, about 90. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm somewhere
Yep.
between the 2. I mean, I go off on slight tangents, and I've got a very talented editor who kind of chops me back a bit. So I go a bit large, and she trims me off a bit. So that's good.
Right, right.
But yeah, so it's a discipline. I mean, I guess I'm trying to make this a second career.
Hmm.
Um,
Nothing
and
wrong with that.
yeah, and it's I'm reasonably on track.
Yeah. So
Um,
what is your process? Like, do you get up in the morning and sit down? I'm going to write. How do you what do
yeah,
you,
that's
sterile
interesting.
environment? How do you write?
I mean, I was never really an early morning guy, but
Mm-hmm.
actually, I think what's been happening is that I kind of maybe I slowly coming out of sleep, and you start thinking about stuff, and it's whirring in your head, and then you say,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, I might as well get up." So I
Right.
do a little bit in the morning. I'm not sort of has to be at a certain time of stuff. I don't listen to music. It changes between kind of parts of the year. Sometimes it'll be on the laptop, just here in the corner where I'm sitting now, or because we're sort of in the south of the country, on nice sunny days, I'll sit in the garden. Um, the 2 differences is either I'm typing it or I have this discipline, which
Oh
is
my
okay. I'm going to
goodness.
sit down and write, and I
Oh
can't get
wow.
away from it. See, it's tiny, 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 if I don't, I've got to do 6 pages. Otherwise, I'm not allowed to get up. And that also applies if I take the family down to the beach, or whatever. I've got a wife and 2 daughters.
Yeah.
I'm 21, one 16, and so we're down there. And rather than read,
Mhm.
I'll just sit there and scribble. And I mean, half the time
And
it's
did you transcribe that into typing and put them in the
yeah,
book? Or those are
afterwards,
just
yeah. I
ideas?
mean, half the time it can just be rubbish.
Mhm.
But actually, even just figuring out what the hell I've written gets me thinking about it. And, eventually it becomes words, and eventually it gets tidy. And I typically reread, go through 3 drafts.
Mhm.
Yeah, but kind of, as I
Do
say,
you feel like you go in like you get on a, like you start writing, oh, now I'm on a streak. I just want to write,
yeah,
and finish my thought out.
yeah, sometimes. I mean, I also do something which I call the slingshot, which is, okay, I know where this chapter is going,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm going to stop just before I've got there, because then that way the next day, rather than sitting there with a white sheet of paper and going, oh shit, what am I going to do now? I can
Mhm.
slingshot forward and I get going again. And then I think once you're in there, you kind of get going.
Right.
I think different folks do it different. Being on a few courses. I mean, I know that you interviewed Stephen Ronson, who's a buddy of mine. We were in the same writing course and group,
Mhm.
and we sort of hook up every now and again to have conversations. And his book's coming out tomorrow, actually. So
Yep.
good luck
Sure
to him.
is.
And there's a lot of things, you learn about the sort of the business of being an author, which you just didn't think of before.
Mhm.
About the marketing, about how important it is to have a social media profile, which platforms seem to work better than others. I mean,
Yep.
I think
What do you
Facebook.
find? What do you find from a platform perspective
Well, I
that
mean, I
works the
really
best?
like Twitter to start with, but now it seems to be kind of like imploding. I mean, that's really
Mhm.
good to get to know people and lots of authors and stuff. I'm a little bit cynical of the whole publishing industry, the traditional publishing industry, because like everyone else, I wrote away to dozens and dozens of agents, and I got stuff up to a certain point. But
Yeah.
I do kind of think that, I don't know about, maybe in the US it might be different, but in the UK it seems to be a business quite sort of run. I think it's 80% of books are bought by women, and I think a lot of the executives are women, and that's not necessarily a problem. But the kind, when you're writing kind of bang bang stuff like you and I
Yeah.
are, and Stephen, then actually maybe we're not straight off the bat,
Mhm.
front and center. That said, I mean, I'm really surprised. I'm doing really quite well. I've got, my first book has got almost 2,000 ratings on Amazon,
Oh, that's
and
amazing.
my second book has got 1,200. So, I
Yeah.
really can't complain. And I think it's kind of viral. I do try to join lots of groups on Facebook,
Mhm.
and so, for example, I'm a member of Warbirds. I'm a member of Battle of Britain. I'm a member
Yep.
of the military thrillers group. So lots of stuff that you can find on there.
Mhm.
And I've invited a few of my sort of author friends along. So just this morning, I invited a guy. There's a thing called military orders, which
Mhm.
sounds a bit dodgy,
Right.
but in fact it's about the Crusaders and the Hospitaliers and all the orders of knights that basically ran there. And he basically writes. He's from Utah, actually, a guy called Daniel
Mhm.
Coulter, nice guy. He writes about the Templar Knights, in the
Yeah.
Crusades.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I said to him, listen, there's 8,000 guys here who really are interested in this. You ought to join and basically slowly start talking about your book. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the way I've been doing it.
Right.
And you mentioned my
But
little promos,
Mhm.
which I do. I don't know how effective they are, but I mean, whenever you have an opportunity to get them in front of some people's eyes, then, it seems to work.
Yeah, some people are visual buyers or visual learners, and they like that the visual aspect of it, then kind
Yeah,
of dive into what that it's actually about that'll tweak their interest.
yeah. I mean, there's another thing which I try to do, is that when there are kind of moments which are important, I don't know, D-Day or
Mhm.
Battle of Britain Day and stuff like that, trying to say, hey, if you're interested, this is what I've done with it. And I try to do stuff around Veterans Day and Remembrance Sundays, we call it here. But you've got
Yep.
to be a little bit careful, because, you've got to be respectful and stuff. So,
Oh, yeah. That's
um,
for sure.
but I mean, I've not offended anyone, I don't think. Well, I haven't, as far as I'm aware. No,
You'd know. Trust me, you'd know.
yeah, probably, yeah. I think I got one guy who tried. I think he was a former U.S. serviceman. He was living in Thailand, and I think he was just kind of having too much of a good time there and decided to have a go at me. But then he calmed down after a while.
Well, that's good. Probably the wore off.
Whatever it was. Yeah.
It's,
Angry
only
juice,
in your
whatever it
body
was.
for a certain length of time
Right.
anyway,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it'll all go. So what's your family think about you being a respected author now? Or they're like,
Well,
okay, Dad.
yeah. I mean, they thought I was a bit kind of, oh God, is he doing that again? But yeah, no, it seems to be. I mean, that's the one thing which is kind of intriguing because they do say, whoever they are, that TikTok is a thing that authors ought to get into, right? Book talk.
Hmm.
And it's
Yep.
a bit confusing. And as far as I can tell, it's lots of kids dancing around and stuff. So I've got a 16-year-old daughter, and I mean she's got something like 6,000 followers on, and God only knows what she's doing on her TikTok.
Right.
Every now and again, I do an inspection,
Yep.
so at some point I may try to do that. I mean, there's various things you can try, like excerpts, or what I might do is something which is like, today, 80 years ago, this happened, and in my book, this happened. I mean, but I've got to figure it out. There's a few authors who have done quite well, and suddenly it goes boom.
Hmm.
But I guess it's just a question of consideration,
Right.
and finding the target audience.
Yeah, I do TikTok. I'll do it once. I have my thing is a walking author
Oh,
because I like to walk,
yeah,
and then as I'm walking, I'll do a 30-second boom, and talk about maybe if you're having writer's block or whatever they call it, get out, exercise,
yeah.
listen to something, and let your mind go, and then come back and write because you're probably you're rejuvenated,
Mm-mm.
or an upcoming podcast that I have, or something about my book, or I'll put out, I'll cook something, or I'll make ice cream,
Yeah,
but
it's
I'll
interesting.
always have one of my books in the background, but I
Okay,
won't talk about it.
okay. It's
It's
interesting.
like I don't
Yeah,
want to push all these things to everybody. So
yeah.
I get some good hits every once in a while, and the strangest thing that what you don't think people would like do a lot of clicks on, it's like they do. Like I got a flat top grill, right,
Right,
and I
right.
had a piece of salmon on it, and I had a top on the salmon to let it steam.
Yeah.
So I just put a little music to it and took the top off to show people. That's got like more views than
Wow.
any of mine. I'm like, maybe I should walk
That's
around with
weird. Yeah,
salmon
yeah,
on my head
yeah,
or
yeah,
something.
yeah. Well, that's okay, but it's kind of like, how does that convert to something? I don't know. I mean,
Exactly. Yeah, you just want followers at that
yeah,
time. It's trying
yeah,
to just gain
yeah.
followers,
I mean, I
and
know
then
my
you use the
daughter
books.
has got a whole bunch of friends, and they heard that I was a writer, and
Mm.
therefore they're following me. And every now and again they say, "Hey, great, whatever." But you don't really want to engage with like a 14, 15-year-old
No.
girl, right?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking
No.
well away about with all
Yeah.
that.
I don't engage with
Yeah,
anybody. I just put the videos out because
yeah,
uh, because I pull TikTok out. I do it. I'm not a fan,
yeah,
but I do it because I think it's a necessity. I do Facebook, Twitter,
yeah,
Instagram,
yeah.
just to be able to
Well, I
get
do
down. Because I didn't
Instagram.
realize at the first that's what it was about when I first wrote my book 2 years ago, a year and a
Mm-hmm,
half ago. I wrote my first book, and it's been out about a year and a couple
mm-hmm.
months. But I didn't know, right? I thought you put your book out there and
Yeah,
people flock to it, even with a publisher. That's not the case. So I think the book launch is critical, which I've learned in the second book to do a little better. Now that the third book and subsequent books, this is what I'm going to do differently
yeah.
than I did the first couple.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think one of the things, I think people who've always wanted to be authors have got this idea in their head that it's about going to signings and handing them out and selling them and stuff like that. Now, I'm digital first, as they call it, which is like
Mm-hmm.
the majority of my sales are through Kindle.
Yep.
A lot of people get really freaked out by Kindle Unlimited, where you basically get paid according to the pages read.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but actually, that's a big chunk of my revenue. So
Right.
there are people who are paying whatever it is, they're $10 a month or whatever. And actually, what you're trying to do is get a share of that. And if you've got a
Mm-hmm.
book which is 300 pages long rather than 250 pages long, guess what? That kind of, so all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff you're thinking about.
Right.
The idea of owning a book is different. I mean, I got really upset initially when my publishers were like selling my books for like $1, and stuff like that.
Right.
And I'm like,
Well, of
how?
course.
But the thing I hadn't realized is that, okay, so you've got the hardback, wonderful hardback that you sort of see in, like Waterstones over here, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
Barnes and Noble over in the States, whatever, and if you're a certain kind of author who's always wanted to be an author, that's kind of where your heart or your ambition is. And, my friend Stephen, he's like that. I mean, he really wants to see his book in the bookshop.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not that bothered, mainly because as a digital first author, I'm getting 50% of royalties.
Mhm.
As a traditionally published author, you're getting like 10-15% of
Yeah.
royalties. And I
Yeah.
guess as a self-published author, you're getting something like 90% of royalties or whatever
Mhm.
it is. So,
Yeah.
I mean, so if you just do the math, right?
Right.
I'm getting half the money for $1.
Right.
Stephen or whoever else is getting 10%. So that's 10 cents on the dollar over there, right?
Mhm.
So it actually works out better for me and probably
Right.
gets, if I could be a successful self-publisher, which I'm not, then
Uh-huh.
perhaps it would get even better.
Right.
But these are things that people don't necessarily go in with. And then, I'm quite a sort of a commercial, well, I call myself a
Well,
commercial
you
fool.
have an ad background, right? So you
Exactly. So
understand
I'm a trader,
you
and
understand demographics and getting someone from looking to buying, right?
that's
So
my
flipping
target
that
audience.
switch.
Persuasion, having a hook at the end of every chapter to get into the next, and just
Right.
kind of psychologies which I kind of worked out for myself, and hopefully they work in a way that perhaps someone who's a little bit more poetic and lyrical about it and kind of
Mhm.
doesn't understand why perhaps it doesn't sell so well.
Right.
Then there's a question of literary ambitions or not. I mean, I don't claim to be particularly literary. I just like untold stories, things that people have forgotten about,
Mhm.
things that people ought to sit up and be respectful about and
Yep.
grateful for. And I want to tell those stories. And also there's a whole, okay, case in point. So I live between here and the beach. There's a big golf course, which I walk with my dog and my wife every day. And around the other side of the golf course, I walk past this little rock about this sort of size.
Mhm.
And it turns out that so the nearest town that I live in is called Bournemouth. And then the only Battle of Britain fighter pilot who got shot down in Bournemouth was a guy from New Zealand, and he basically crashed there, like 2 blocks away from me on a corner. He jumped out of his plane, his parachute didn't open, into the ground. He
Oh
landed on a
wow.
hedge, and the people who were in the house basically they called over and he was buried and everything like that. And the husband and wife who were like put flowers on his
Mhm.
grave and said from the garden where this hero fell. And about 2 months later, their house bomb landed on it and the guy was killed. The husband was killed. And then you look into that, and then in my street, there's like 2 houses down the way, which was
Mhm.
also destroyed. And so you find out about these things. And my next book, for example, so I discovered on the 23rd of May, 1943, out of the blue on a Sunday, these a Focke-Wulf fighter bombers attacked Bournemouth and bombed a whole bunch of stuff, and something like 600 people were killed, but out of the blue, Sunday afternoon. And the tragedy of it was during the war, because there were so many troops from the US,
Mhm.
Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and stuff. These guys were over here kind of fighting for us, but they
Right.
didn't have any families. They didn't have anywhere to go on leave and stuff. And
Mhm.
this is when the bomber campaigns were going. And so
Yeah.
basically, the powers that be said, okay, hey, Bournemouth is a nice place down by the beach. In that hotel, we're going to put the Canadians. In that hotel, we're going to put the Australians. Guess what got bombed? The hotel for the Canadians, and actually
Mhm.
something like 150 of these Canadian and Australian young guys were killed, and they're all buried. So I'm going to put that in my next story. So stuff like that. I like telling stuff, stories
Right.
about what people have forgotten, maybe.
And that's remarkable because how did the Germans know that? There had to have been some kind of espionage going on that they know those hotels
Well, that's
were
very
packed.
interesting. Actually, it's very interesting because they're actually known as the I'm probably mispronouncing this. The Baedeker raids. Okay, and apparently in Germany there were hotel guides
Mhm.
back then, which were called the Baedeker guides. And the Baedeker guides basically talked about places in the UK before the war that were good to go and visit. And they're saying that they use the
Ah,
Baedeker guides. Oh, we should go and bomb this guy's and this place. That's the theory, anyway. I don't know if that's true.
that's
But
interesting because I think a lot of people think you look at a war movie now, you
hmm,
see the Americans and the British and whoever they're on the continent, right? They're
yeah,
in France, they're in Germany, but you have to figure out that we didn't really the Italian campaign I think was in
hmm,
the late 30,
2,
43 and
Yeah, that's right.
everything. But before that, we got in the war in 41, 1941. Troops started probably going to England in 42.
Yeah.
Everybody staged in the England. right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's where they departed out of to the continent. We didn't just
Right.
land on Normandy Beach from New Jersey.
Yeah, yeah.
They were staged out of there. I think a lot of people
But
don't
actually,
know
I mean,
how many troops were there.
the first significant number of Americans actually were involved, I believe, with the Dieppe raid, which was kind of like the opportunity for the Canadians to have a first go. But all the Eagle squadrons were involved, and there were about 3 or 4 Mustang squadrons, purely
Yeah.
American ones who joined in to get blooded. And also, for the first time, U.S. Rangers went in with the commandos, for the first time. So that's the first time the U.S. got involved in Europe. Then the next big show, which was kind of run by the Americans, was the Torch landings, which is North Africa. And actually interesting that there, yes, you're right. Most of them were sort of springboarded off the UK, but there was actually one convoy of troops and everything, which came all the way from America and
North
basically went
Africa.
straight into Africa, which is kind of like, God, you wouldn't want to be them. Be sick. Be sick as parrots.
Oh,
and
then they went to Italy. Then they went to Italy.
That was into northern France, and actually they were kind of lucky because the French didn't really want to fight. Now, I'm probably being a bit unfair there, but so the Torch landings, North Africa was a hell of a lot easier. Then the next tough thing was Tunisia, which I'm writing about now, and that's where Patton first basically became important. But before that, the Americans got a real hard time in a place called Kasserine Pass.
Yep.
And then basically working together with the British coming from Egypt and Libya, and the Americans coming down, basically it squeezed out, and that was kind of Tunisia was.
Well, they had
the first
Rommel,
time.
right? When Rommel was fighting, I mean, he was
That's right. Well, he was the
brilliant tactician in armor warfare.
He was the guy, but then he got kind of sick, and then he basically went off, and then someone came in, and then so that was Tunisia. And what I'm doing now is basically Sicily. So Sicily was again a sort of half and half show, but obviously kind of Patton and Montgomery who didn't really like each other, and that's that. And of course, I'm a little bit removed because I'm actually sort of flying above them and telling that story. But it's just kind of interesting things to talk about. There's like the mafia, their involvement, and that sort of stuff, and then there's all kinds of stuff like. I mean, one of the things is that the first time airborne were used properly in a large scale, both UK and US. He was Major Gavin at the time, but he became Gavin of the 82nd Airborne.
General Gavin, yeah.
That's right. The first time that he actually led troops actually was a disaster because the weather was so bad. It wasn't that the airborne troops were no good. It was actually the pilots in the Dakotas and in the towed gliders. And then a whole bunch of American and British troops end up drowning because they were dumped in the sea. And then it turned out that they had all their gear, but rather than having life jackets, Mae West life jackets, like you sort of see in the films, they just had a rubber ring. Yep. So what would happen is just
flip them upside down.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that happened also in at Slapton Sands, which I mentioned earlier. But so there's all kinds of stuff. There's another part of my story, which is when the V-bombs, the doodlebugs started coming over. That again was, the Blitz happening again. And there was a really bad bomb that landed on an area of London, and actually it landed on a American decontamination unit. Now, what does that mean? Well, that's because they thought and they expected the Germans to get desperate and to start using chemical weapons, and so therefore there were a whole bunch of these. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, no one quite understands why he didn't use them because actually he was using them on all kinds of other people and things, but he actually in warfare he didn't, and that was an unusual thing. But I guess it's sensible to have a bunch of experts who would be able to decontaminate stuff.
I only think the reason why, because in World War I he did get Hitler got mustard gas.
That's right, he did. Yeah.
So that might have changed his view, so he didn't do it from a strategic perspective.
Yeah, I guess so.
Because they're still finding I believe, back in the 80s or something, they were still finding traces of mustard gas in the fields in Belgium and France. And it was, I mean, it's nasty stuff.
Nasty stuff, yeah.
Nasty stuff.
I mean, I guess, it's a bit hard to think of Hitler having lots of morals, considering all the things that happened.
Reasoning.
I mean, but it's kind of like a strange thing to consider. But the irony is, as I say, this decontamination battalion got hit by a doodlebug, and like loads of them got wiped out. And the funny, and it's not at all funny story, is
Mm.
a day or two before that in the same building
Uh,
that they were in. Oh God, what the hell was his name now? The big band leader with the glasses,
Benny.
Chattanooga Choo Choo, and all that.
Oh yeah. Oh, who's that? I know
Anyway,
you're talking about. I can't think
him
of it.
and
I'll
his
think of it
entire
in a second.
band.
I'll be sitting at home going, boom.
Yeah, and I got it suddenly. You're sitting in the shower, and suddenly you got it. But no, so he apparently was actually kind of in the same building block or whatever. And a week before, he got a bit worried about these things flying over. He said, no, listen, I got to move out, and he moved out. And he was lucky he survived that
Mhm.
because the other guys didn't. But ironically, he ended up dying, getting shot down over the channel about a week or two later. Yeah.
Oh wow, that's
What the hell's
crazy.
his name now?
I can't think of it.
It's like the most famous big band
Yeah.
leader ever.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah, I can think of it. I'll think of it here in a little bit. But so when you got two books out, when's your third coming out?
third one comes out on the 22nd of December.
22nd December.
Yes, Amazon are telling me they can get it for Christmas. Yeah. So again, being the ad guy, so my thing is that the standard response that I get from people when they find out about my books, it says, "Oh, my dad would love that. Or my uncle would
Right.
love that. Or my granddad
Right.
would love that."
Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay. I'll take that. That's okay.
Yeah, I'm writing my third in a
Mhm.
series,
Yeah.
but then I'm also going to start a fictional World War One
Okay.
from a first person perspective.
Right.
So I'm started on that.
What Sergeant
Yeah.
York, kind of U.S. perspective?
It's going to be U.S., but it's going to be, I think, there's going to be a little twist in it that I'm thinking about. It's not. I've started just outlining the book right now, the plot and everything, and then there's a children's book that I want to do.
Yeah.
That
I mean, the one slightly left field thing well, it's not that left field, but so I'm doing a screenwriting course. I'm like week 7 now, and I started adapting my first book.
I would love to do that. That would be awesome.
Become a kind of Band of Brothery kind of thing, sort of 6-7 episodes. So I've done the first one, which is about 50 minutes long. I've no idea who I'd pitch it to, but I mean, I guess you got to keep moving forward.
Yeah, you got to have ideas, right? If you got ideas, you put them down and make them work out eventually, and it may take a while to do it.
It's quite a difficult thing, because as you know, when you're writing, so you've got you've got dialogue, you've got description, and then you've got sort of inner dialogue and sort of like reflections, and the guy says like, "Damn, she's good looking." Now, you can't do any of that stuff in a screenplay, except if you do what I think is quite a bad thing. You often sort of see like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where she's going, "God, I hate that girl. She's so awful," and basically it's what's going on inside their head, right? But that's kind of like to me a kind of lazy way of writing a screenplay. So everything needs to be visual. And therefore, you got to change stuff. Invent guys to ask questions, and find a dumb guy who needs everything explained to him. Stuff like that.
That'd be interesting to be able to do.
Yeah.
Well, so where can everybody find you, Patrick?
Right. Well, I'm on Linktree. I mean, I've got quite an unusual name, so Patrick Larsimont. Plug that in, and I come up all over the place. So I'm on Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram. And one of the things I do is try to load images which kind of inspire me to write. So actually, they're on Instagram, on Amazon. I mean, I'm sort of like a big Amazon guy, so I'm all over that. So pretty straightforward to find me, I guess.
Excellent. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you today, and especially just talk about your books, but didn't talk about random things. That's kind of what Author Ecke is about, right?
Definitely. Well, as I enjoyed it.
Ecke is corner in German, but we're just round, so there's no quarters. It's just
great stuff,
corners or anything. But great. So it's been a pleasure. The best of luck to you on your new book, the other two that you have.
Yeah.
I know you're doing some other stuff too.
So the next one is called The Maple and the Blue. And the maple is obviously our Canadian friends, and the blue talks about the big blue sky of North Africa.
Oh, wow. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, no, because the Brits used to talk about going off into the blue. So I mean, all of my series are the something and the something. So the next one is going to be the Vulcan and the Straits. The Vulcan being the volcano of Etna, and the Straits being the Straits of Messina. And it goes
Interesting,
on, and it goes
interesting.
on.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you,
Okay.
and we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.